So, thank you so much for your work, your friends, I would say, everyone, and your excellency. I'm really honored. Yes.
Doesn't work.
It doesn't work?
Yes.
Okay, I'm really loud, so I can I can use my voice. I might stay without at the end of the session, but still. Okay, so I'm really honored to be here. I'm really honored that you all actually came to this conference, and I'm looking so very much forward to the other lectures, and I'm really happy also to have the next speaker, the next, yes, Professor Rudolf Klein, because we're going to discuss a certain topic which should have been maybe discussed a little bit earlier. It was actually partly, but unfortunately nobody was truly listening. So the topic is one of the now actually quite renowned synagogues. Yes? No? You can't? You can't? If I approach the microphone, no? What can we do? Well, I'll try.
Stop the museum.
Stop the museum.
Yeah. Turn off.
What I did when I spoke?
It was the energy.
No, I touched it. Can you hear that
Yeah,
one?
yes, yeah.
Volume up.
Oh.
Oh.
Can you hear it?
Yes.
This is the problem.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
Up.
Okay.
We must find a right.
Yeah.
Volume down. Where is both? Volume down.
Yeah.
No, I shouldn't approach it too much now. Okay. Well, I won't start from the beginning, but I would like just to tell you that it is my great honor also to visit this exact location. It was in the year 2000 that I spent a semester at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and this is when I got acquainted with the Center for Jewish Art. So we've been friends with people in the center ever since. And actually, I also listened to the course of the Dean of the Humanities back then, Yom Tov Assis. Unfortunately, he's not among us anymore, but he was a source of a lot of inspiration, and also he ordered me to do a seminary work for him. And that seminary work for him I chose was about the medieval Jewish community, and actually explicitly about the Maribor synagogue. Now, I wrote it. I think I got quite a good note, although I also think that maybe I didn't deserve it truly, because I was not satisfied with myself, my work. And this was simply because out of one reason, and that was I couldn't collect enough material to draw any of the new conclusions. So in the year, it was when 2014, Barbara Murowitz, the head of the Institute of Art History, unfortunately back then, asked me to write a book again about Maribor Synagogue, and she gave me only 3 months to finish. So a limited amount of time. By the time, of course, I was following the synagogue. I read-examined a lot of material, also by being involved as a director of the Documentation Center and Research Center, GAC, which stands for Jewish Archives in Slovenia and Ljubljana. So I said yes. Okay, and I went for the first time to the Institute for Preservation of Cultural Heritage in Maribor, because what I was given back then, the year 2000, was only 3 or 4 panels where they actually made a kind of a preservation, but I think the crucial data was missing. And when I started to dig in the meantime, the old director of the institute retired, the architect which was involved in supervising the restoration of the synagogue also was retired, and there were new people which came, and they welcomed me, actually opened me the door to the documentation. So suddenly I had entire documentation at my disposal, and I started copying, I started studying, and what I found was also a letter of my mentor, Natasha Golob. By the way, she also is a good friend of Aliza Korn-Mashlin, and she asked the director of the institute to please open the doors actually to the archives, which never happened. So actually, I only could start the research in the year 2014. So let me tell you that the documentation they made is quite extensive. So I did a lot of slides. I actually also digitalized them and so. And I remember the friend of mine, Andrei Schmidt, who also who was a student of Rudy Klein in the 90s, late 90s, and I remembered, of course, all what he was telling me, that he also was not able to get inside to get. There were also closed doors for him. So just a second. So it was a great help of mine and kind of a blessing that I was able to work together with my wife, who's an architect, and we could actually start dealing and processing what we found from various perspectives. But let me tell you, we actually came to certain conclusions which were published for the first time in that publication, which was resulted. It was a book in Slovenian issued by the Institute for Art History in Ljubljana, Frances Tele. It was a pocket book meant for the general public, so there were no footnotes, so there was no like scientific backup in that. But still, I think that the conclusions we actually put on, the conclusions were kind of groundbreaking, because until the year, was it 2015, the general perception of the restoration of Maribor Synagogue was that it was really well done restoration, one of the finest examples in Europe, and it was even used as a model for other research of the medieval architecture. In the last 2 decades, there was a lot of progress done in Europe, also by the staff involved, working together with the Center for Jewish Art and the guys in Braunschweig University. So actually, I had a lot of material, a lot of things I had to study, and I could study, and actually I also did some historic research, so we got some additional data about the datation of the first phase of the building, because in the 1990s the general perception was that the only documented source testifying the existence of the synagogue was in the year 1429, but we actually predated it. We found another document dated from 1354. So I'm really sorry, and I have to apologize because I won't be able to present the whole research. But I also have certain texts ready to read to you, but maybe in this case the best thing would be to complement with the next presenter, Rudy, and first of all to present to you like visually what we're talking about. So you can see here the Maribor Synagogue as it looks like today after the restoration was completed at the end of the last century. And it definitely is one of the most beautiful landmarks of the medieval town of Maribor. And we're also really happy that it is now being used for the cultural purposes. Just a second. Okay. How to start the research? Well, of course, one of the historical perspectives was to find the oldest depictions of Maribor. And according to my own knowledge, this is the oldest one, dating back to 1654. It is stored in the Maribor Regional Museum, and there's something really special you can see here on the picture. Question: can you turn on off the lights? Maybe it would be better.
We can close.
I'm not so sure whether in the 1990s they knew about the existence of this picture, and what we see is actually something quite telling. This is the section with the synagogue, and I don't know whether you can see it clearly, but there is a gabled roof on a synagogue, and if we go back here, you can see a hip type of the roof actually on a synagogue. And all the other depictions present the synagogue already as being turned into the Church of All Saints in 1501, and they just a second, wrong direction. They also show the bell tower, which was added a little bit later in the second half of the 17th century. So attached. So this depiction is already a little bit closer to the present reconstruction, but still you can see that the hip roof is a little bit elongated, unlike what we have on the depiction, well today what we see on the synagogue. So there are some historic documents which are to be which are traceable in the archives of Maribor, regional archives, and you can see the presentation of the synagogue before the restoration was initiated. And at the time, you can see there was only one level of the synagogue, but then, of course, they realized that they should start digging deeper. And they also found the original entrance into the synagogue. On this is the view of the eastern side of the synagogue. Actually, after another additional building was pulled down because they wanted to they decided to present the synagogue in its core. And there was the eastern entrance into the synagogue. What you can also see here. Above the entrance, there is a keystone built into the wall, which belongs to the vault of the former structure. And I'm now showing you, actually, for the first time in a kind of for scientific public, some photo documentation which I found at the Institute for Art History, Frances Tele, and it is the oldest documentation of the synagogue. You can see the same keystone building the way down, and we can also see some other leftovers of the architectural architectural leftovers of the previous buildings, synagogue buildings, and you can see additional elements like the consoles, which would be, of course, and were extremely important for the conservation. Now, in the 1990s, they launched quite extensive archaeological research, which is fundamental for understanding the development of the building. They did it quite thoroughly, but what we know, of course, that medieval archaeology was at its beginning phase. So unfortunately, if it was initiated to date, the methodology used would be quite different. So it was led by Ivan Tušek, the chief archaeologist, but there was also Mihaela Kaiser-Capnik involved, who is today working at the Institute for Preservation of Cultural Heritage in Maribor. And she was a young student. She told me personally that she didn't know what exactly she was supposed to do, but what she did turned to be of immense value. Namely, in the article published by the chief restorator, actually not restorator, but the chief conservator of the project, Janez, he concluded that the archaeological findings didn't bring them to any of the plausible conclusions. Now, this is a really kind of interesting statement, which means that although they did it quite thoroughly, they didn't know what to conclude from it. And the more I started digging into it, the more I realized that there was not real interaction between different segments of the conservation. So we have the art historical analysis, historical research, we've got archaeological research, and we've got restoration. So, and this is like, summing up mosaics, little stones, the mosaic. So, when I talked to the architect, we actually met in the 2000 and something, 2002 maybe. She already told me that they actually tried to find out what the older phases of the buildings looked like, but they didn't come to any conclusions. And when they decided to restore the present building, the director of the institute claimed that they decided to reconstruct the phase which left the biggest amount of the leftovers, the biggest proofs that it actually existed. But in the article, actually 2 articles he published, the argumentation is not correct. And I published recently direction towards the south. Well, we know that there was also a cemetery located next to the synagogue. We do not know exactly whether it was located on the eastern side or maybe on the northern side surrounding it, but there are some non-historic documents proving it. So we know that this is not an exception. There was a medieval synagogue in Rufach, where there was also a cemetery surrounding it. We know about Krakow. I'm not going to discuss now the other plans because I think Rudi is going to do it. But you can see the niche as it looked like during the restoration work and as it looks like now. So what we also have is, well, this is the view towards the Jewish Tower, and this is what Ivan was mentioning before, and this is a radar scanning of the plateau next to the synagogue, which revealed truly traces of some material buried in the ground. And look at this. This is a historic photo. Durchblick auf den Stadtturm am alten Judenfriedhof in der Allerheiligengasse. So actually, if the name is preserved, the toponym, there is a good chance that there truly was a cemetery, which was then moved to the present, to the other location outside the city wall, as it was according to Halakha. So this is the leftovers, extremely important for the reconstruction of the synagogue. You can see the two keystones which were taken for the current restoration of the space, but well, we have many questions concerning that those keystones. So our suggestion about the second phase of the building is also kind of quite interesting, also kind of groundbreaking, because it puts it to the Altneuschule or Speyer. We think that there were two columns in this space. One was attested, the one on towards the eastern wall, but they simply skipped through it out in the final report, but we have it on the pictures. And where's the second one? The second one? Well, no fundaments were found, but they're exactly the position of the wall, and you have to follow the mind of people, involved in builders. They tried to use already the existing space. Unfortunately, this is not exactly correct presentation, but the position of the second support is the Baroque face of the building. This is the three-bay division of the space made by Rudy's student. Already in the 90s, this is like an exceptional achievement to do it in a 3D sketch. And the reason why we think the space was not divided into three bays, but into six, is the angle of the keystones we found. Because there should be rectangular base, not the three keystones we found didn't correspond to this. Now, were the three other keystones missing? Well, there's a logic. There was an attack on Maribor by the Turks in the second half of the 15th century, and we know that parts of that wall were damaged. And we think that attack was the reason why they decided to change the space afterwards in the second half of the 15th century. So we now come to the phase which has the least testimonies. And they tried to explain why they decided to reconstruct the space into two-bay place was by the remains of something which looks like being a console, but on the other wall there was nothing. So this still has to be the issue of the last phase has to be solved, but it is actually backed by another document proving that there was a Judenschule, that somebody had to give some money for the building of the Judenschule. And Judenschule, that was a synagogue, that was not a Bet Midrash. So we know that there was a big reconstruction of the space, inner space, happening between 1965 and, let's say, the beginning of the 1980s. The end of the 1980s. Okay, this is kind of details of the wall, which actually, well, we won't have now time to enter. Well, this is a mikveh in Spar. We know also existed in Maribor, but it was on the attached place to the south of the present synagogue. So I think that the best thing to continue this discussion is with the following lecture and with the discussion afterwards. So thank you so much.